The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Kensington Palace as Captain James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what he believed would be another routine day protecting the royal family. 23 years of dedicated service had taught him to read the subtle signs of trouble, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday. Princess Charlotte, now 18 and radiating the grace that had charmed the world since her birth, was scheduled for a private photography session in the palace's rose garden. The session was meant to commemorate her upcoming gap year before university, a milestone that had the entire royal household buzzing with quiet excitement. James had been personally assigned to her security detail, a responsibility he carried with the utmost pride and dedication. As Charlotte emerged from the palace's side entrance, James noticed something different about her demeanor. Usually bright and engaging with the staff, she seemed distant, almost fragile. Her normally perfect posture appeared slightly hunched, and there was a pallor to her complexion that concerned him. When their eyes met, he saw something that made his trained instincts sharpen with worry, fear. "Your Royal Highness," James greeted her with his customary bow, "the photographer has been setting up for the past hour. The lighting in the East Garden is particularly beautiful this morning." Charlotte managed a weak smile, but James noticed her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her small handbag. "Thank you, Captain Morrison. I appreciate your attention to detail as always." Her voice, usually clear and confident, carried an unusual tremor that immediately put James on high alert. The photography session began smoothly enough. Charlotte posed gracefully among the roses, her training evident in every gesture. But James, positioned at a discreet distance, observed her growing increasingly pale with each passing minute. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool morning air, and she frequently pressed her hand against her side in what appeared to be pain. During a brief break, as the photographer adjusted his equipment, Charlotte approached James with unsteady steps. "Captain, I was wondering if you might know, has there been any news from Tom Parker Bowles recently? Any official visits or appearances planned?" The question struck James as odd. Tom, Camilla's son from her first marriage, had always maintained a relatively low profile compared to other members of the extended royal family. His work as a food writer and critic kept him largely out of official royal duties, though he occasionally appeared at family gatherings and state functions. "I haven't received any briefings regarding Mr. Parker Bowles, Your Highness." "Is there something specific you need to know? I could make inquiries through the appropriate channels." James studied her face carefully, noting the way her jaw tightened at his response. No, that's quite all right. I was just curious." Charlotte turned away quickly, but not before James caught sight of tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Every instinct screamed that something was seriously wrong, but his position demanded he respect royal privacy unless directly asked for help. As the session resumed, Charlotte's condition visibly deteriorated. Her poses became forced, her smile strained. The photographer, a seasoned professional who had worked with the royal family for years, began showing signs of concern. He suggested several breaks, but Charlotte insisted on continuing, driven by what seemed to be desperate determination to complete the task. James found himself torn between his duty to maintain appropriate distance and his growing certainty that the princess was in real distress. His radio crackled softly with routine security updates, but he found it increasingly difficult to focus on anything other than Charlotte's declining state. Her movements had become sluggish, and she was now openly pressing her hand against her abdomen with obvious discomfort. The breaking point came without warning. Charlotte was posing beside a magnificent climbing rose when she suddenly stopped mid-gesture, her face contorting in pain. James took an immediate step forward, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio, but Charlotte held up a shaky hand to stop him. "I'm fine," she gasped, though clearly she was anything but fine. "Just give me a moment." But the moment stretched into something far more serious. Charlotte's breathing became labored, and the color drained completely from her face. James watched in growing alarm as she swayed dangerously, one hand clutching the rose trellis for support while the other pressed against her side with increasing urgency. The photographer had stopped working entirely now, lowering his camera with obvious concern. "Your Highness, perhaps we should postpone the remainder of the session? You seem unwell." Charlotte tried to shake her head, tried to maintain the composure that had been drilled into her since childhood, but her body was betraying her. James saw the exact moment when her strength gave out. Her knees buckled, and she began to collapse toward the thorny rose bush. Training and instinct took over. James lunged forward, catching Charlotte just before she fell into the roses. As he lifted her into his arms, his worst fears were confirmed. His uniform sleeve came away stained with blood, not from the thorns, but from Charlotte herself. "Get the palace physician immediately," James barked to his radio while cradling the princess. "Medical emergency in the East Garden. Princess Charlotte requires urgent attention." Charlotte's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and filled with panic. Her lips moved weakly, and James leaned closer to hear her words. What she whispered sent shock waves through him that had nothing to do with the medical emergency unfolding. Tom Parker Bowles," he said, he promised. Her voice was barely audible, but the pain in it was unmistakable. "He said no one would ever know, that it would be our secret." James felt his blood run cold. In all his years of service, through scandals and secrets, public triumphs and private tragedies, he had never heard anything that chilled him quite like those few whispered words. The implications were staggering, and he realized that what he was witnessing might be far more complex than a simple medical emergency. Charlotte's hand gripped his arm with surprising strength for someone in her condition. "Please," she whispered urgently, "don't tell anyone what I said. Promise me you won't tell anyone about Tom." The palace physician arrived within minutes, accompanied by a full medical team. As they worked to assess Charlotte's condition, James found himself grappling with a terrible dilemma. His duty was to protect the royal family, but from what? And who was he supposed to protect them from when the threat might be coming from within? As Charlotte was carefully lifted onto a stretcher, she lost consciousness entirely. The blood loss was significant enough that the medical team's faces showed serious concern. James stood frozen, watching the young woman he had sworn to protect being rushed toward the palace's medical wing, her whispered words echoing in his mind. The photographer, shaken by what he had witnessed, approached James hesitantly. "Captain, I want you to know that I won't speak of what happened here to anyone. The royal family's privacy is paramount." James nodded absently, his mind racing. Privacy. Secrets. Tom Parker Bowles. A young princess bleeding and collapsing while speaking a man's name with obvious distress. The pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to solve were beginning to form a picture that made his stomach turn. As the garden returned to an eerie silence, James remained standing among the roses where Charlotte had fallen. Blood droplets on the pristine petals caught the morning sunlight like tiny rubies, a stark reminder that something had gone terribly wrong in what should have been a safe, controlled environment. His radio crackled with updates from the medical team. Charlotte's condition was stable but serious. She was being prepared for immediate transport to a private hospital where more extensive care could be provided away from potential media attention. Standard protocol for royal medical emergencies, but James knew there was nothing standard about what had just occurred. The weight of Charlotte's whispered plea pressed heavily on his conscience. She had begged him not to reveal what she had said about Tom Parker Bowles, but, as her protector, how could he ignore information that might be crucial to her well-being? The conflict between his duty to the institution of the monarchy and his duty to protect an individual member of that institution had never been more stark. As James began the process of securing the scene and filing his incident report, he made a decision that would haunt him for days to come. For now, he would honor Charlotte's request for silence. But he would also begin his own discreet investigation into Tom Parker Bowles and his recent interactions with the princess. Something had happened between them, something serious enough to cause Charlotte physical and emotional trauma. And James Morrison, veteran royal protection officer, was determined to find out what that something was, even if it meant uncovering truths that the royal family would prefer to keep buried forever. The morning sun continued to shine on Kensington Palace's gardens, but, for James, the day had taken on a darkness that no amount of light could dispel. As he walked back toward the palace, his mind was already working through the implications of what he had witnessed. Charlotte's collapse was just the beginning. The real challenge would be protecting her from whatever had caused her to whisper Tom Parker Bowles' name with such obvious pain and fear. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Palace Security Headquarters, media blackout in effect. Official statement: Princess Charlotte experienced minor dehydration during outdoor photography session. Currently resting comfortably. No further details available. James stared at the message, knowing it was a carefully crafted lie designed to protect the royal family from speculation and scandal. But it also meant that whatever had really happened to Charlotte would remain hidden, at least for now. The question that haunted him was whether that protection was keeping her safe or enabling her continued harm. As he entered the palace corridors, James made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth about Tom Parker Bowles and Princess Charlotte, whatever the cost to his career or his relationship with the royal household. The young woman he had caught in his arms deserved nothing less than complete protection, even if that protection had to extend to threats from within the very family he had sworn to serve. 3 days had passed since Princess Charlotte's collapse in the Rose Garden, and Captain James Morrison found himself walking a tightrope between his official duties and his growing personal investigation. The princess remained in the private wing of London's most exclusive medical facility, where a carefully selected team of doctors worked under strict confidentiality agreements to address what had been publicly described as exhaustion and dehydration. James knew better. The blood loss, Charlotte's physical condition, and, most importantly, her whispered mention of Tom Parker Bowles suggested something far more serious than the sanitized version being fed to the media. His years of experience had taught him that when royals collapsed while bleeding and speaking someone's name in obvious distress, there were usually darker truths lurking beneath the surface. The morning briefing at Scotland Yard's specialized Royal Protection Unit felt different now. Commander Sarah Walsh, a 20-year veteran who had overseen security for 3 generations of the royal family, delivered updates with her usual efficiency, but James detected an underlying tension that hadn't been present before Charlotte's incident. Princess Charlotte's medical team reports continued improvement, Commander Walsh announced to the assembled officers. Her return to public duties is expected within 2 weeks, contingent on her physician's final clearance. Until then, we maintain standard protocol with enhanced privacy measures. James raised his hand carefully. Ma'am, have there been any changes to the security assessments for other members of the extended royal family? Any new protocols or concerns we should be aware of? Commander Walsh's eyes sharpened slightly, a reaction that confirmed James's suspicion that his question had struck a nerve. All security assessments remain current and appropriate. Is there a specific concern prompting this question, Captain Morrison? No specific concern, ma'am. Simply ensuring I have complete situational awareness for my ongoing protective responsibilities. James kept his tone professionally neutral, but he noticed several of his colleagues exchanging glances. In the tight-knit world of royal protection, even subtle inquiries about security protocols could signal deeper concerns. After the briefing, James made his way to his desk to begin the delicate process of researching Tom Parker Bowles without raising official suspicions. Using his authorized access to public records and social media monitoring systems that were standard tools for royal protection officers, he began building a timeline of Tom's recent activities. What he discovered was troubling in its apparent normalcy. Tom Parker Bowles, aged 48, had maintained his usual professional schedule over the past several months. His food writing assignments, restaurant reviews, and cookbook promotions showed no obvious disruptions or unusual patterns. His social media presence remained consistent, photos of gourmet meals, wine tastings, and occasional family gatherings. But James had learned long ago that the most dangerous secrets often hid behind the most normal facades. He began looking deeper, cross-referencing Tom's public schedule with Charlotte's known activities and appearances. The intersection points, when they existed, seemed innocent enough: family dinners at Clarence House, the occasional charity event where multiple family members appeared, holiday gatherings that were standard royal tradition. However, one pattern began to emerge that made James increasingly uncomfortable. Over the past 4 months, there had been at least 6 occasions where both Charlotte and Tom had attended the same events or been present at the same royal residences. While this wasn't unusual given their family connection, James noticed that Charlotte's public demeanor had gradually changed during this same timeframe. Reviewing security footage and photographs from recent royal events, James observed a subtle transformation in Charlotte's behavior. The confident, radiant young woman who had charmed the world was becoming increasingly subdued. Her smiles appeared more forced, her interactions with family members more strained. Most tellingly, whenever Tom Parker Bowles was present, Charlotte seemed to maintain careful physical distance, something that royal protocol experts would likely attribute to proper formal behavior but that James's trained eye recognized as avoidance. His investigation was interrupted by an encrypted call from the hospital. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, Charlotte's primary physician, requested an immediate security consultation. Something in her tone suggested this wasn't routine medical protocol. James arrived at the hospital within 20 minutes, using discreet entrance protocols that ensured his visit wouldn't attract media attention. Dr. Hartwell, a distinguished woman in her 50s with decades of experience treating high-profile patients, met him in a private consultation room far from Charlotte's wing. "Captain Morrison, I want to discuss some concerns regarding Princess Charlotte's medical condition. Before I continue, I need to emphasize that everything we discuss is bound by both medical confidentiality and royal security protocols." James nodded, though he felt his pulse quickening. "Of course, Doctor. What can you tell me?" Dr. Hartwell consulted her notes carefully before continuing. "The princess's physical injuries are more complex than what has been publicly reported. While we have successfully addressed the immediate medical concerns, there are aspects of her condition that suggest deliberate harm." The words hit James like a physical blow, even though part of him had been expecting something like this since Charlotte's collapse. "What kind of deliberate harm, Doctor?" "I cannot provide specific medical details without the princess's explicit consent, but I can tell you that her injuries are consistent with sustained physical trauma over an extended period. This wasn't a single incident of illness or accident. Someone has been hurting her, Captain Morrison." James felt a cold rage building in his chest. "Has Princess Charlotte provided any information about who might be responsible?" Dr. Hartwell's expression grew troubled. "That's why I called you. She has been, uncooperative might be too strong a word, but she's clearly frightened of something or someone. She's refused to discuss how her injuries occurred, and she becomes agitated whenever we suggest involving additional security or conducting a formal investigation." "Has she mentioned any names? Anyone she's specifically concerned about?" "Not to me directly, but the nursing staff reported that she's had several nightmares where she calls out a name, Tom, I believe. She always wakes up distressed and asking for reassurance that he doesn't know where she is." James closed his eyes briefly, feeling the pieces of a horrific puzzle clicking into place. "Doctor, is Princess Charlotte in immediate physical danger if she were to encounter this Tom person?" "Based on her psychological response and the pattern of her physical injuries, I would strongly advise against any unsupervised contact with anyone who causes her this level of distress. She needs time to heal, both physically and emotionally, in a completely safe environment." After leaving the hospital, James sat in his car for several minutes, grappling with the implications of what he had learned. Princess Charlotte hadn't simply collapsed from exhaustion or dehydration. She had been systematically abused by someone, and all evidence pointed to Tom Parker Bowles as the perpetrator. The whispered name, her obvious fear, her injuries, it painted a picture that made James's professional training and personal protective instincts align in a way that demanded action. But taking action against a member of the extended royal family without absolute proof would end his career and potentially cause a scandal that could damage the monarchy itself. James found himself facing the same dilemma that had plagued royal protection officers for generations: how to protect the royal family from threats that came from within their own ranks. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number: "Stop looking into things that don't concern you. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Consider this friendly advice." James stared at the message, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Someone was watching his investigation, someone with enough access to his personal phone number and enough knowledge of his activities to know exactly what he was researching. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Instead of discouraging him, the message only strengthened James's resolve. Whoever was behind it had just confirmed that there were indeed dangerous secrets surrounding Charlotte's relationship with Tom Parker Bowles. Moreover, they had demonstrated that these secrets were important enough to warrant surveillance and intimidation. James made a decision that would fundamentally change his approach to the entire situation. He would no longer conduct his investigation alone. There were other people in the Royal Protection Service, people he trusted completely, who would help him uncover the truth about what had happened to Princess Charlotte. The anonymous threat had been intended to silence him, but, instead, it had convinced him that the danger to Charlotte was real and ongoing. He pulled out his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. Detective Inspector Maria Santos answered on the second ring. Maria had worked Royal Protection before moving to Scotland Yard's Special Crimes Unit, and James knew she could be trusted with sensitive information.
Maria, it's James Morrison. I need to meet with you tonight. It's about Princess Charlotte, and it's urgent.
There was a brief pause before Maria responded.
How urgent, James?
Urgent enough that I think a member of the royal family is in immediate danger, and urgent enough that someone is trying to stop me from investigating it.
Meet me at the usual place in an hour. And, James? Be careful.
If someone's threatening you over a royal investigation, you're dealing with people who have resources most criminals can only dream of. As James drove toward his meeting with Maria, he reflected on how quickly his world had changed. 3 days ago, he had been a loyal royal protection officer with an unblemished record and complete faith in the institution he served. Now he was conducting a clandestine investigation into potential abuse within the royal family while being actively threatened by unknown parties who wanted the truth buried. But every time doubt crept into his mind, he remembered the weight of Princess Charlotte's unconscious body in his arms and the terror in her voice when she whispered Tom Parker Bowles' name. Whatever the cost to his career or his relationship with the royal household, he was committed to ensuring that no one would hurt her again. The evening London traffic provided cover for counter-surveillance techniques James hadn't used since his military days. By the time he reached the discreet cafe where he was meeting Maria, he was confident that he hadn't been followed. But the anonymous threat had taught him that his adversaries possessed sophisticated capabilities, and he could no longer assume that any of his communications or movements were truly private. As he walked into the cafe, James carried with him the burden of knowledge that could potentially destroy careers, end marriages, and shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. But he also carried the determination to protect a young woman who had asked for his help in the most desperate way possible. The investigation into Tom Parker Bowles and his relationship with Princess Charlotte was no longer a matter of curiosity or professional diligence. It had become a race against time to uncover the truth before whoever was protecting Tom's secrets decided that Captain James Morrison posed too great a threat to be allowed to continue his work. Charlotte's safety, James's career, and the reputation of the royal family now hung in the balance, and the next few hours would determine whether justice could be achieved or whether powerful forces would succeed in burying the truth forever. Detective Inspector Maria Santos had chosen their meeting location carefully. The small cafe in Bloomsbury attracted an eclectic crowd of university students, writers, and professionals who were too absorbed in their own conversations to pay attention to two people discussing sensitive matters in hushed tones. As James settled into the corner booth where Maria was already waiting, he noticed she had positioned herself with clear sightlines to all entrances, old habits from their shared years in royal protection. "You look terrible, James," Maria observed without preamble, studying his face with the analytical eye that had made her one of Scotland Yard's most effective investigators.
"How long since you've slept properly?"
"Sleep hasn't been a priority since Tuesday," James admitted, accepting the coffee Maria had ordered for him.
"Thank you for meeting me.
I know this puts you in a difficult position." Maria leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice.
"Before you tell me anything, I need you to understand something.
If what you're investigating involves criminal activity by a member of the royal family, there are protocols that supersede both our friendship and normal police procedure."
"Are you prepared for that level of complexity?"
James had been dreading this question since he'd made the call. "Maria, if I'm right about what's been happening, protocols and procedures become secondary to protecting someone who's being systematically harmed. I need your help not just as a detective, but as someone who understands how these systems work and where their weaknesses are." Over the next hour, James shared everything he had discovered: Charlotte's collapse and bleeding, her whispered mention of Tom Parker Bowles, Dr. Hartwell's confirmation of sustained physical trauma, the threatening text message, and his growing certainty that Charlotte was the victim of ongoing abuse. Maria listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes in a code she had developed during her years handling sensitive cases. When James finished, Maria sat quietly for several minutes, processing the information and its implications.
Finally, she looked up with an expression that combined professional concern with personal anger.
James, what you're describing isn't just abuse, it's systematic grooming and assault of a vulnerable young woman by someone in a position of power over her. The fact that it's happening within the royal family doesn't make it less criminal, it makes it more dangerous because of the resources available to cover it up.
Can you help me prove it? James asked directly. Maria nodded slowly.
Yes, but not through official channels, at least not initially. We need evidence that's so compelling that it can't be buried or dismissed. That means we need Charlotte's cooperation, medical documentation that can stand up in court, and proof of Tom Parker Bowles' access and opportunity. Charlotte specifically asked me not to reveal what she said about Tom. She's terrified of the consequences. Which is exactly what we'd expect from an abuse victim, especially one whose abuser has powerful family connections and institutional protection. The fear is real, James, but so is the danger of allowing the abuse to continue. Maria pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. I'm going to reach out to some people who specialize in cases involving powerful perpetrators. There are ways to build these cases that protect the victim while gathering evidence.
But, first, I need to ask you something difficult. James prepared himself for whatever was coming. How certain are you that Tom Parker Bowles is acting alone?
Abuse within powerful families often involves multiple people, perpetrators, enablers, and people who actively work to suppress investigations. If we're going after Tom, we need to be prepared for the possibility that other people in the royal household know what's been happening and have been helping to hide it.
The question hit James like a physical blow.
He had been so focused on Tom as the primary threat that he hadn't fully considered the broader implications. You're asking if other members of the royal family might be involved in covering this up.
I'm asking if you're prepared for that possibility.
Because once we start pulling at this thread, we might unravel more than just Tom Parker Bowles' crimes. We might expose a conspiracy that reaches much higher up the royal hierarchy. Before James could respond, his secure phone buzzed with an incoming call.
Commander Sarah Walsh's name appeared on the screen, and James felt his stomach drop.
Calls from his supervisor at this hour usually meant emergency situations or serious problems. I have to take this, James told Maria, stepping away from the table. Captain Morrison, Commander Walsh's voice was tense and formal. I need you to report to my office immediately. There's been a development in the Princess Charlotte situation that requires your immediate attention.
What kind of development, ma'am? The kind that requires face-to-face discussion in a secure facility. How quickly can you get here? James checked his watch. 20 minutes, ma'am. Make it 15. And, Captain? Come alone.
The line went dead, leaving James staring at his phone with growing apprehension. Commander Walsh's tone suggested either a major breakthrough or a significant problem. Given the threatening text message he had received earlier, James suspected it was the latter. He returned to Maria, who immediately read the concern on his face.
Trouble? My supervisor wants to see me immediately.
Something about a development in Charlotte's case.
James gathered his things quickly.
Maria, if something happens to me, if I suddenly get reassigned or suspended or worse, I need you to promise me you'll continue looking into this.
Maria grabbed his arm as he prepared to leave. James, what if this meeting is about your investigation? What if someone reported your inquiries about Tom Parker Bowles?
The possibility had occurred to James, but he couldn't avoid the meeting without essentially confirming any suspicions his supervisors might have.
Then, I'll have to deal with the consequences. But, Charlotte's safety is more important than my career. Don't be noble, be smart. If they confront you about the investigation, admit nothing unless you're absolutely certain they already have proof.
And, remember, you're not just protecting Charlotte anymore. You're protecting the integrity of the entire Royal Protection Service. James nodded grimly and headed for the door, but Maria's voice stopped him one final time.
James? Watch your back.
People who abuse members of the royal family and people who cover up those crimes don't hesitate to eliminate threats to their security.
You've become a threat.
The drive to Scotland Yard felt longer than usual, giving James time to prepare for multiple scenarios.
Best case, Commander Walsh had received new information that would help his investigation.
Worst case, his own activities had been discovered, and he was walking into a trap designed to end his career and silence his inquiries. The Royal Protection Unit's offices were eerily quiet for a weeknight, with only essential security staff on duty. Commander Walsh's office was located in a section of the building designed specifically for handling classified royal security matters, complete with soundproofing and electronic surveillance countermeasures.
Commander Walsh was not alone when James arrived.
Seated across from her desk was a man James didn't recognize, late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of calm composure that suggested either high-level government service or private security work for powerful clients. "Captain Morrison, thank you for coming so quickly," Commander Walsh began formally.
"I'd like you to meet Mr. Charles Whitfield from the Cabinet Office. He has some questions about your recent activities."
James felt his training kick in, maintaining neutral body language while his mind raced through possibilities. The Cabinet Office's involvement suggested this situation had escalated far beyond normal royal protection protocols. Mr. Whitfield studied James with sharp, intelligent eyes before speaking. "Captain Morrison, I understand you've been conducting inquiries related to Princess Charlotte's medical condition and certain members of the extended royal family. I'm here to discuss the national security implications of those inquiries."
"National security implications, sir?"
"The stability of the British monarchy is considered a matter of national security, Captain. Investigations that could potentially damage that stability, regardless of their intent, must be carefully managed to prevent unintended consequences." James realized he was being warned off, but the formal language and bureaucratic setting suggested this was more than a simple threat.
"Sir, if there are national security concerns, shouldn't that make a thorough investigation more important rather than less?" "Mr.
Whitfield exchanged a glance with Commander Walsh before responding. "Captain Morrison, I'm going to share some classified information with you in the hope that it will help you understand the complexity of this situation.
Tom Parker Bowles has been under discreet surveillance by MI5 for the past 18 months as part of an ongoing investigation into certain financial irregularities." James felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "Financial irregularities, sir?" "Money laundering, specifically."
"Substantial sums moving through offshore accounts connected to his food writing business. We believe he's been manipulating his relationship with the royal family to facilitate these transactions, using royal events and connections as cover for meetings with criminal associates." The information was staggering, but James immediately saw the problem. "Sir, if Tom Parker Bowles is under investigation for financial crimes, that doesn't address the evidence suggesting he's physically harming Princess Charlotte." Mr. Whitfield's expression hardened. "That's where national security concerns override other considerations, Captain. If we move against Tom Parker Bowles prematurely for any reason, we lose our opportunity to uncover the full extent of his criminal network. The financial crimes we're investigating involve millions of pounds and connections to international criminal organizations." "So Princess Charlotte's safety is being sacrificed for a financial investigation?" Commander Walsh leaned forward, her voice carrying a warning. "Captain Morrison, you're walking into territory that's above your clearance level and beyond your authority. Mr. Whitfield is offering you information to help you understand why your independent investigation needs to stop immediately." James felt anger building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain professional.
"What about Princess Charlotte's medical condition?"
Dr. Hartwell confirmed that she's been systematically injured over an extended period. "Dr. Hartwell has been fully briefed on the national security aspects of this case," Mr. Whitfield replied smoothly. "Princess Charlotte's medical care will continue under enhanced security protocols that ensure her safety while allowing the MI5 investigation to proceed."
"Enhanced security protocols that keep her isolated from anyone who might help her report what's really been happening to her?" The question hung in the air like an accusation.
Mr. Whitfield's calm expression didn't change, but James noticed his hands tighten slightly on the arms of his chair. "Captain Morrison, I'm going to be direct with you because your service record suggests you can handle direct communication. Princess Charlotte's situation is being managed by people with access to information and resources that dwarf anything available to local police or even royal protection services. Your continued interference puts both her safety and a critical national security investigation at risk." James realized he was being offered a choice between his career and his conscience. Accept the official explanation and return to normal duties, or continue his investigation and face the consequences of opposing forces that included MI5 and the Cabinet Office. "Sir, I need time to consider what you've told me." "Of course. But, Captain, time is not unlimited. Events are moving quickly, and decisions made in the next 48 hours will have lasting consequences for everyone involved." As James left the meeting, he carried with him the weight of impossible choices. Either Tom Parker Bowles was a sophisticated criminal whose prosecution for financial crimes took precedence over his potential prosecution for physical abuse, or Tom Parker Bowles was a protected asset whose crimes were being covered up by the highest levels of British intelligence. Neither possibility offered much hope for Princess Charlotte's safety or justice for what had been done to her. But James Morrison had not spent 23 years protecting the royal family to abandon that mission when it became complicated by bureaucratic politics and national security concerns. The real investigation was just beginning, and now James knew exactly how powerful his adversaries were. The question was whether he and Maria Santos could uncover enough truth to protect Charlotte before those adversaries decided to eliminate the threat they posed permanently. 2 weeks after his confrontation with Mr. Whitfield and Commander Walsh, Captain James Morrison stood in the early morning darkness outside the private medical facility where Princess Charlotte was still recovering. Everything had changed in those 14 days, and nothing had been resolved. The MI5 investigation that supposedly took precedence over Charlotte's safety had mysteriously stalled. Tom Parker Bowles continued his normal routine under what was claimed to be discreet surveillance, and Charlotte remained isolated from anyone who might genuinely help her. But James had not been idle during these crucial weeks. Working with Detective Inspector Maria Santos and a small network of trusted contacts, he had assembled evidence that painted a far different picture than the one presented by Mr. Whitfield. The truth, when it finally emerged, was more complex and more damaging than James had initially imagined. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source, Charlotte herself. 3 days earlier, she had managed to smuggle a letter out of the medical facility through a sympathetic nurse who was horrified by what she had witnessed during Charlotte's treatment. The letter, written in Charlotte's careful script, contained details that confirmed James's worst fears while revealing additional layers of corruption and abuse that extended far beyond Tom Parker Bowles. Maria Santos had arranged to meet James in Regent's Park before dawn, choosing the open space and early hour to minimize surveillance risks. When James arrived at the designated bench, he found Maria studying a thick folder of documents that represented weeks of careful investigation. "Tell me you have good news," James said as he sat down beside her, though her expression suggested otherwise. "I have the truth, James. Whether that counts as good news depends on your perspective." Maria opened the folder and pulled out Charlotte's letter. "This changes everything. Tom Parker Bowles isn't the primary perpetrator, he's been covering for someone else." James felt his world shift as Maria handed him the letter. Charlotte's words were clear, precise, and devastating. "Captain Morrison, I know you've been trying to help me, and I'm grateful for your protection in the garden. But there are things about my situation that you don't understand, things that make it dangerous for you to continue investigating. Tom Parker Bowles has been helping me, not hurting me. He's been trying to document evidence of what's really been happening, and that's why I was meeting with him. The injuries, the fear, the reason I collapsed, it's not because of Tom. It's because of someone much closer to home, someone whose position makes it impossible to seek help through normal channels." The letter continued with details that made James's blood run cold. Charlotte described months of systematic abuse by someone who used their royal position to isolate her from potential help. The perpetrator had convinced other family members that Charlotte was struggling with mental health issues, making her reports of abuse seem like delusions or cries for attention. "Tom has been secretly collecting evidence," Charlotte's letter explained. "He's risked his own reputation and safety to help me because he knows that without proof, no one will believe me against someone so highly placed in the royal hierarchy." When I collapsed in the garden, it was because I had just learned that our evidence gathering had been discovered. I was terrified that Tom would be silenced or hurt because of his attempts to help me. Maria pointed to a specific paragraph that James had missed on his first reading. "Look at this, James." She identifies the real perpetrator. James read the words with growing horror. "The person who has been hurting me is someone you see every day in your royal protection duties. Someone who uses their access and authority to ensure that their crimes remain hidden. Someone who has convinced MI5 to create a false investigation into Tom's finances as a way to discredit him before he can present the evidence we've collected." The letter concluded with specific details about hidden recordings, photographed documents, and witness statements that Tom Parker Bowles had assembled over several months. But, most importantly, it identified the true perpetrator as someone within the immediate royal family circle, someone whose position would make prosecution extraordinarily difficult without overwhelming evidence. "Maria," James said slowly, "if Charlotte is telling the truth, then, Mr. Whitfield's meeting with me wasn't about national security. It was about protecting the real abuser and discrediting the people trying to expose them. It gets worse, James. I've been checking the financial investigation that supposedly involves Tom Parker Bowles. There's no evidence of money laundering, no suspicious transactions, no criminal associates. The entire MI5 investigation is fabricated. Someone with access to highly classified resources has been creating false intelligence reports to justify neutralizing Tom as a threat." James stared at the early morning joggers and dog walkers beginning to populate the park, struck by the normalcy of their activities in contrast to the conspiracy he was uncovering. "Who has that kind of access, Maria?" "Someone at the highest levels of either intelligence services or royal household management. Someone who can authorize surveillance, create false investigations, and manipulate official reports without triggering normal oversight mechanisms." Maria pulled out another document from her folder. "But here's what gives me hope, James. Tom Parker Bowles is smarter than his enemies realized. He's been creating multiple copies of everything, storing evidence in different locations, and building a network of people who can verify his claims. If something happens to him, the evidence doesn't disappear." "What kind of evidence?" "Audio recordings of threats made against Charlotte. Photographs of her injuries with timestamps that correlate to specific royal events. Financial records showing payments to medical staff for falsifying reports about Charlotte's condition. And, most damaging of all, documented communications between the perpetrator and people in intelligence services discussing how to suppress the investigation." James felt a mixture of hope and dread. The evidence might be sufficient to protect Charlotte and expose her abuser, but the conspiracy to cover up the crimes involved people with resources and authority that dwarfed anything he and Maria could muster. "Maria, if we move forward with this, we're not just fighting one criminal. We're fighting a system that includes corrupt intelligence officers, complicit medical professionals, and possibly other members of the royal family who chose to protect the perpetrator rather than the victim." "I know. But, James, look around this park. Look at all these people going about their normal lives, trusting that the institutions meant to protect them actually do protect them. If we don't act, if we let powerful people cover up crimes because they're too connected to prosecute, then we're betraying everyone who depends on justice being available to all." James made his decision with the clarity that comes from finally understanding the true scope of a problem. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to help me get Charlotte to a safe location where she can provide a complete statement without interference from people who want to silence her. And I need you to help me deliver Tom Parker Bowles' evidence to journalists and prosecutors simultaneously, so that no single person or agency can suppress it. That will end my career in royal protection. Probably. But it will also save Charlotte's life and expose a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of British intelligence and royal household management. Some things are more important than careers, James." Over the next hour, Maria outlined a plan that was both desperate and carefully calculated. They would extract Charlotte from the medical facility during a shift change that Tom Parker Bowles would facilitate using his family connections. Simultaneously, evidence packages would be delivered to investigative journalists at 3 major newspapers, the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee. The plan required precise timing and absolute commitment from everyone involved. If it failed, Charlotte would likely be moved to a more secure location where she could be completely isolated, Tom Parker Bowles would be arrested on fabricated charges, and James and Maria would face charges that could result in lengthy prison sentences. "There's one more thing you need to know, James," Maria said as they prepared to leave the park. "I've identified the real perpetrator based on Charlotte's letter and the evidence Tom has collected. It's someone you've been protecting for years, someone whose position makes this betrayal particularly devastating." James felt his stomach clench. "Who?" Maria handed him a photograph that Tom Parker Bowles had secretly taken. It showed a person James recognized immediately, someone he had trusted completely, someone whose betrayal of that trust represented not just criminal abuse but a fundamental corruption of everything the Royal Protection Service was meant to accomplish. The face in the photograph belonged to someone James had defended, supported, and risked his life to protect. Someone who had used that protection and trust to commit horrific crimes against a young woman who had no one else to turn to for help. As James stared at the photograph, he realized that his 23 years of loyal service had been protecting not just the innocent members of the royal family, but also a predator who used royal privilege to escape consequences for unconscionable crimes. "Maria," he said quietly, "when we do this, when we expose everything, it's going to destroy more than just one person's reputation. It's going to shake people's faith in institutions they've trusted their entire lives." "I know. But the alternative is letting those institutions continue to be corrupted by people who use their power to hurt the innocent. Charlotte deserves better than that. Everyone deserves better than that." James folded Charlotte's letter carefully and put it in his pocket. In a few hours, he would either be a hero who had helped expose a massive conspiracy and saved a young woman's life, or he would be a disgraced former royal protection officer facing criminal charges for interfering with national security investigations. But, as he walked away from Maria and toward what might be the last day of his career, James carried with him the certainty that he was finally doing what he had sworn to do 23 years earlier, protecting the royal family from those who would harm them, even when the threat came from within their own ranks. The truth about Princess Charlotte's abuse, Tom Parker Bowles' heroic attempts to help her, and the conspiracy to silence them both would soon be impossible to suppress. And Captain James Morrison, whatever the cost to his own future, would make sure that justice finally reached even the highest levels of power in Britain. The final battle was about to begin, and, this time, the innocent would not be left to suffer in silence while the powerful escaped consequences for their crimes. This time, the truth would prevail, no matter who tried to bury it.